Okay, welcome everyone joining from the live stream. That was an excellent fireside discussion, ranging everything from education to democracy to digital identity. Very excited to have you joining us online in this crazy time of Corona to launch this digital center at Hertie. I'm Lisa Witter, the co-founder of Apolitical, and I'm going to be your moderator for this next hour. Now, we really, while we're launching the center, we're sitting here in an EU office. We really want to build a community of those of you who are interested. So if you are joining us via the live stream, get ready to vote via some polls and also do some interactive work. So to kick us off to hear a little bit more is the Deputy President of the Hertie School, Mark Halleberg. Mark.
I'll say hello from Berlin Mitte, but from Friedrichstrasse as opposed to the European Commission delegation. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure, in fact, to welcome you to the first of two launch events of the Hertie School's Center for Digital Governance, which focuses on challenges to digital governance. We have been talking about different centers of competence here at the Hertie School for some time, and I'm delighted to see this one indeed have its formal launch event. I should say that this afternoon's event has been arranged in cooperation with the representation of the European Commission in Germany, as you can tell, indeed, with Lisa's background in terms of how this runs. It focuses on regulatory questions in digital governance, but this is one event only. There'll be a second event that will also take place on October 29th, and will draw connections of digital governance to the field of sustainability. So I hope you also come back for that one as well. Let me just say a few things in terms of the center itself. This is a center that was formally created in 2019, so this is freshly baked, as one can say. In terms of its goals, you saw something already in the video, but it is really to conduct academically rigorous research, to provide a leading world-class education, and to contribute to societally relevant policy insights. These are three of the different parts that are integral to what it is that the center is doing. I should say, I think these are rather important and critical topics in terms of how this runs, especially when we think about the fact that Germany currently has the presidency of the European Union, and that there are some decisions that are coming up in this respect. I was told to say one or two words about what's coming up in terms of the afternoon discussion. There are a few key questions that are coming, but Lisa, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder here. But I'll mention just two. How does the European approach differ from the roads taken by the United States and by China, by two major powers, you could say, when we think in the digital world? And the second is, how can decision-making in the digital realm be coordinated in Europe in order to foster public well-being? Well, today's topics will go into these topics, and let me just say one final thing, which is, I guess there's some poetic justice that we're opening up a digital governance center digitally. Welcome again that you've logged in to talk and to follow this, and I really like this idea as well, that there'll be some bottom-up parts to this too, where you'll have a chance to vote. So I look forward to seeing how you all vote. So Lisa, let me turn over the floor back to you.
Thanks, Mark. I think we can share thunder. These are big enough questions that we can address them several times. And I think it's appropriate to kick off, following off of you, to actually hear from some students with their reactions to the fireside chat. Well, why is this important? Well, number one, Hertie is a place for research, but is also a place full of great students who come to the capital of Germany, very international group, to answer some of these hard questions. And also, if you think about a lot of students these days, they didn't quite grow up with a handy in their hand, but they are the ones using technology and will be thinking about technology longer than some of us older generations or some of the people who are doing the policy work right now. So we have two students who are going to give a reaction, one from California and one from the UK, so one from Europe and one from the center of where a lot of this tech started. So Maxwell Phillips, welcome Maxwell. He is from California, but has been living in Germany for 4 years now. He's a second-year candidate for the MIA at the Hertie School that is not missing in action. He's very much in action. And prior to his studies, he worked for a global innovation platform and is an investor in Plug and Play. So he's been in the tech world, but then also thinking about the tech world. I'll introduce the second one, then I'll turn it over to each of them. We have Rachel Griffin. Really warm welcome, Rachel, from the UK. She has a bachelor's degree in law, so we'll bring that legal perspective from the University of Oxford, and is in her second year master's here in the Public Policy School at Hertie after studying for a year at Sciences Po in Paris, so may bring some of that French perspective to that. So Maxwell, you each have 2 minutes to, what are your reflections hearing from the fireside chat? Over to you.
Okay, I believe we're going to let Rachel go first, so I'll hand over the table to Rachel.
Okay, thanks, Maxwell, and thank you for the introduction, Lisa. It was so interesting to hear that speech from the Executive Vice President, and I think it was really good to hear a European leader articulating such a positive vision for digitalization in Europe, which really centers around equality and the quality of public services. So myself and the other students are really optimistic about the European model that she described, where new technologies are implemented in a transparent way, in a way that's more democratic. We think there's so much potential for these technologies to help improve public services, to enforce regulations, and to serve the public interest. But we also have some concerns that incorporating these new technologies into public services can also mean handing over control of important infrastructure, of sensitive data, for example, to private tech companies. And a lot of the discussion so far around the Digital Services Act seems to have focused on competition and opening up the market in technology, which is obviously really important. But maybe we could also in Europe be thinking more outside the box and start thinking about other ways that digital technologies could be managed in the public interest that are not just about relying on market forces. We also see often in Europe that digital technologies are often used not really to combat inequality and empower people, but to entrench existing power structures. For example, we see in Europe facial recognition being used to track populations that are considered suspect. We see AI being used to flag supposedly suspicious claims to social security. And this is not really living up to the technology's potential to empower people and to promote inequality and access to services for everyone. So something that we would really love to hear more about from the panel is how the EU can take Europe in the direction of using digital technologies to really serve everyone and to promote equality and empowerment, and not just to maintain existing power dynamics.
Rachel, thank you very much. We were struck listening to the fireside chat, for those who joined us for that it was really from a place of first principles. Like what do we really want to do first, and the technology followed. So we're going to be talking a bit more about that. We're going to hear from Danny Stockman in a minute. She has deep expertise in China. And Rachel, I wonder if it's an accident that over your shoulder we see panda bears in Chinese. I wonder how to get the Chinese perspective in this European conversation. So let's go from the UK to China, but back to Germany. But Maxwell, you with your Californian, super interesting, your investor perspective as well. What are you thinking about the fireside chat, and what insights do you have or questions do you want us to cover?
I think that in the fireside chat, there were 3 different elements of more of an industrial European digital policy that were discussed. And I just want to kind of touch on some of the elements that the other students and I, when we huddled, thought were the most important. So the 3 elements, there's kind of this foundation of education that is critical to building a digital society. The second is to have more of a digital infrastructure. And I mean, this is the hardware. So having 5G networks and things like this. And then the third element is the services that are running across this digital infrastructure here in Europe. And so what was brought up in the fireside chat was making sure that Europeans can have a digital education. And this was really paramount throughout the discussion. And we absolutely agree. But we also want to make sure that there's a place for these students to go after they've completed their education. So are there connections to investors so that students who have an idea for digital service can be connected to see out their entrepreneurial vision? And the second piece that we would really like to see is to have the companies be more connected to the education system. So actually we can have a digital pipeline for students to go enter the digital economy here in Europe. And when we're talking about digital infrastructure, There's a lot of talk in the media right now, obviously, about Huawei and 5G. And beyond security concerns, to have Europe really be successful in the future, it's really important to have European companies that are making the hardware. This supports European jobs. It supports European education, of course, as well, as we can have a more engineering ecosystem. And so it's really important that Europe ensures that it's not left behind technologically when the next evolution in digitalization takes place. So by investing in European companies now that create this digital infrastructure, we can ensure a European digital future going forward. And lastly, there's the services that run across these networks. And a lot of these services that we use right now are obviously run by US firms. And this is everything from Facebook and Instagram, but also to things like Amazon Web Services and data storage platforms that a lot of companies use. And the relations with the United States are not going very well right now. And so we really wanted to know if Europe is prepared to manage the relationship with the United States going forward to ensure access to these platforms going forward. And secondly, if relationships sour to the point where maybe this access is threatened, what are the alternatives that Europe can think of? Maybe building European alternatives to some of these services is one idea, but that's also not necessarily realistic in a free market economy when this is something that Europe has not invested in yet whatsoever. So these are just some things that we wanted to prod the European community to think about when it comes to digital transformation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. An optimistic set of questions and observations about the role of Europe, with some cautionary tale about what the relationship will be going forward with places that hold some of this technology. We are less than 30 days out from a big election in the United States. Politics does matter. So we'll see what happens with that. So thanks for that. We'll get back to some of these really fundamental, again, first principles. Is it for making sure that the power stays, or is it opening up power? How do you do education for all, creating pipelines for jobs? Really, really good questions that we'll get to. I find in these conversations, though, we'll have very little time, and the devil's often in the details around the how. So hopefully our panelists will get a little bit detailed and not so general that, yes, we need to do this, but what are some concrete ways to do that? Okay, thanks for the students. We're going to be hearing from a couple more students here coming up. But I really want to turn to some people who live and breathe this every day from different perspectives to give their thoughts on where we're at. So I'm going to go over the questions, but I'm going to introduce you first. So if you could wave when I say your name. So Prabhat Argal. Prabhat, could you wave? He's currently working on the European Commission's policies and regulations in the field of online platforms and electronic commerce. So right at the heart of all of this stuff. Each of these people have a really long bio. I'm just going to keep it super short so we can get to their brains and we can look up their bios online. Mariche Schaak. Mariche, could you smile? I've been watching Mariche. I know Mariche for a long time, deeply, deeply committed to this European way. She is now, after leaving politics for quite some time, she's left politics where she's been a huge advocate of human rights and working on these digital issues. I was really lucky to co-chair an Agile Governance Council with her and learned a lot from Mariche. She's the International Policy Director at the Stanford University's Cyber Policy Center and International Policy Fellow at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. If you haven't seen it, it's really worth using your favorite search engine. Notice I didn't give anyone a plug there. And look at a New Yorker profile of her and her experiences, which I hope we're going to hear about pretty soon, about living in America. The vice president talked about how she feels so European when she goes to the US, and I think we'll hear that from Mariche as well. Then last but not least, in the studio, but socially distanced from me here in Mitte, we're following our protocols as you all should, is Daniela Stockman. She goes by Danny, is a professor of digital governance at the Hertie School. I don't think it's an accident that she's wearing red. I don't think that's promotion necessarily of the country she knows a lot about, but she has spent significant amount of time thinking and being in China. I know you were with Steinmeier officially on his trip, and so looking at that way, the Chinese way, what might the European way, what might be an American way. And just recently, Mariche has put out a piece in the MIT Review worth, again, using your favorite search engine to look up, on what a global way might look like. So let's get into it with the question, then I'm going to go back to the audience. Under the German presidency, as we've heard from Mark Hallerberg, the European Union will make some really critical decisions on the development of what this European model is, the European way forward. How might this approach differ from that taken, again, by the US or China? And how can decisions in the digital realm be organized in Europe in such a way that it fosters public well-being? So how to really engage people in this way, in this democratic way to do that. So I've asked each of our panelists with some discipline to start off with a one-word response and then a 2-minute explanation about what that one-word response is. I'm going to ask you watching to put in your one-word response too for what is the European way forward. I'll come back and make some comments on that. So I'll start here in the studio with me wearing red. She's going to talk about China. What is the Chinese way in a word, and explain sort of how you see this working with the European way. Danny.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that the vice president started off by saying the European way was to have a strong public sector. I would instead say the Chinese way is to emphasize state. So to me, digital governance sets out the formal and informal decision-making processes that determine the power between state, society, and corporations in the digital realm. And China is very strong in terms of putting a state-centered approach forward. But I would say that oftentimes the misperception about China is that China has a very top-down approach, whereby the state pretty much develops ideas like the social credit system and then tells corporations what to do. But my own research shows that that's actually not the case. Alibaba developed the social credit system that then later was picked up by the Chinese state and made into policy.
So you would say the European approach is more stakeholder, if there was a word, focused, where it's more sort of corporate driven in the Chinese model, Danny?
So to me, the difference is that yes, I think the vice president is right. Of course, the public sector is more important, but the state in Europe really has the role of setting the circumstances in order to empower society and corporations to take initiative. So it's more about, I think it's more of a role of creating the conditions, the right conditions.
Condition setting. Okay. I'm not seeing anyone in the chat. This isn't a normal chat that you see. It looks like a questions and answers. So go ahead and put in your word or what you want to add to this conversation. I'll call you out through the conversation. I'm going to go over to you, Prabhat. We're talking about Europe. What is the one word? Do you agree with Danny? Is Danny wrong about the way she sees this, about the European way forward? Are you there, Prabhat? Oh, he's muted. I see. It's not a web conference if someone doesn't talk when they're muted. You feel comfortable. It's like a feeling of home. Here we go.
I think I've been unmuted. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think the one-word challenge is really tough for me because the beauty of Europe is just the diversity of ideas and different concepts. But if I have to pick one, it would be fairness. That's the one word that I would hold up very high. It's really the kind of guiding concept for what we're doing. A fair balance and in fair dealings. So happy to expand on that later.
Fantastic. Fairness. Again, first principles here. Mariche, how about you?
I would say rule of law. One, because I think it is the anchor, and two, because I think it should always be central in how regulation takes shape, not to attack technology, but really to uphold principles, as the vice president also mentioned. And happy to expand as well. But thanks for having me.
Great. Good. Really to the point. I like it. So now we're going to hear from a few more students, and then we're going to come back to our panel. So let's over to the video to hear from more students.
and I'm from Bulgaria. I would really like to see for the Commission putting forward the question of how social platforms influence our interpersonal relationships. With the inclusion of the digital in our private lives, we're faced with ethical dilemmas on a new level, namely that our whole lives are on the record. Data doesn't belong just to us or the platforms, it belongs to other persons as well. I would really hope that we can address issues such as revenge porn, cyberbullying, and cancel culture. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marcelo Lozada, and I'm a lawyer from Colombia. I'm a second-year student of the MPP at the Harris School. So I think the Commission should come up with an overarching narrative of the European Union values in the digital age. It means thinking about a multi-stakeholder approach to empower government, civil society, and companies on equal footing. Moreover, in terms of content-specific topics, I would like the Commission to focus on the development of new algorithms that address the social disruptions we are experiencing today. For example, the spread of fake news, hate speech, or clickbaiting, among others. So definitely be among the priorities of the Commission.
Hi, my name is Thomas Jeston. I'm a first-year MPP student at Hardy School of Governance, and I come from Toronto, Canada. A robust and effective European digital strategy is one which protects public and private sector privacy, harmonizing policy across what is a complex political and bureaucratic structure. Accountability for enforcing and complying with regulations should be clear and cost-effective for all participants, while also maintaining low barriers of entry to foster startup innovation. The intricacies of digital governance demands innovative, efficient, and transparent tools such as blockchain and AI to detect non-compliance in a comprehensive and timely manner.
Well, fantastic. That's a great segue to our next question, talking about regulation and enforcement. And this is my next question to the panel. We're going to do a bunch of quick fire questions here. And again, please engage with us in the chat so we can, or in the Q&A part, which serves as a chat. In a word, I'm going to start with you, Marietje, because you started off with rule of law. In a word, what's the biggest challenge do you see in regulating the internet? It's easy to say, oh, we should regulate the internet, but what is the biggest challenge, and explain why? Marietje.
Well, I don't think we should be regulating the internet. I think we should be regulating for principles. And sometimes that may include, ensuring that, for example, antitrust rules are upheld in the digital world, or non-discrimination principles. But I think the idea that we're regulating the internet is putting the wrong priority first, and allows companies to imply that they are under attack and that they are unjustly regulated. But I agree with Prabhat, it's about fairness. And it's about time that tech companies are going to be fairly regulated, because they've basically escaped regulation for a very long time.
Well, fascinating. So Marietje, you're saying that the narrative maybe is being won by them by saying, hey, regulating, I know a lot of tech companies had called for regulation, right? Regulate us. This is some controversy over some of this. You're saying don't follow in that regulate frame. Let's take the frame of like upholding laws and having principles, right? So switching that narrative, really, really interesting. George Orwell says that politics is communications, and you just proved that right there with just reframing some of the language around that. Prabhat, how about you? What is the biggest challenge to regulating or not, if that's not the question anymore, in a word, and if you could explain why?
Well, I think just three aspects that I'd just like to briefly mention. One is, I think a lot of the students who've come in, they've highlighted the kind of richness and complexity of things that we need to look out for. So it's not just about regulation. It's many of the students came in saying we need to support also innovation, blockchains. We need to help startups get access to money. Think about investors. Think about where students are going to learn, how they're going to learn, and what they're going to do afterwards. So just to say that all of these things are also on the mind of the Commission. So it's not just about regulation. I think it would be a mistake, first of all, if we narrow the conversation only to what we should regulate and what we should not regulate. That's my starting sentence, and I'm happy to put some links into the chat in case others can see that. Now, the second thing, the biggest challenge in regulation is, at European level, I think let's not start with the challenge, let's start with the opportunity. The opportunity is to lay down exactly the rules, like Marietje said, that reflect our values in terms of fundamental rights protections, in terms of rule of law, that really should govern our digital space. And these are really the words of Commissioner Breton, is to kind of take ownership of the digital space that we have and lay down common rules that are consistent with our fundamental rights and are consistent with our kind of ideas of how this space should be governed. So that's the opportunity. So my first point was about the bigger challenge. Regulation is only one part, and maybe just the smallest and least important part of the whole conversation. The second one is that regulation is above all, I see it as an opportunity, because also, like many of the students have said who've come in, is that there is a real opportunity to have laid down better and stronger protection for things like privacy, where Europe has been a pioneer, but also for illegal content online, like some of the things that have been mentioned. Now, to come to the challenge is that, we are a continent of 27 different countries, many different cultures, and of course the variety of different uses of digital services online is enormous and reflects the whole rich variety of our society. And of course the challenge comes to that is to kind of identify what are the ground rules that make sense for everybody across the whole continent and that bring us all together.
Prabhat, let me follow up. I like your opportunity-minded approach, sort of glass more than half full. You talked about, though, the challenge being about these 27 different member states. So what's the opportunity and the diversity for the EU to handle this? Where's the silver lining there?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the approaches that we're taking, and it comes back to what Marietje said, is that are we really regulating the internet? What are we doing here? You know, one of the objectives that we have with the Digital Services Act is not so much to say what should be online and what should not be online. That's something that is really not for a government, certainly not for the Commission to decide in a way. I think what we really are thinking about is that what are these procedures that we should have? You know, it's a little bit like going to a concert hall. You know, you expect there to be a fire extinguisher, a fire exit, an alarm button everywhere. And our approach is really to be sure that the safety infrastructure online is available for all digital services, and that this safety infrastructure is designed in such a way that it doesn't interfere what kind of music is being played in the concert hall, what kind of speech is being given. So that's just an analogy, and I think this is something that we can all agree on across, because it doesn't seek to harmonize or to kind of make a kind of uniform layer of bringing all of common standards to something that is kind of deeply rooted in different cultural traditions. So there may very well be some areas where we all agree that some types of content are illegal and they need to be outlawed across the whole continent. But the way to bring all countries and all cultures and all different users together, I think, is by putting the user first, by making sure that they have safety buttons available and safety procedures, that there is an accountability framework around some of the negative externalities that we now come across, particularly in the space of large online platforms. This was something that the Executive Vice President mentioned as well. And I think that these are all very broadly consensual at the moment.
It's really great. Are you a musician, by the way? I love the music metaphors. Are you a musician?
I like Woody Allen said, a lot of enthusiasm, but no talent.
I have a feeling there's more to probe there, but I'm going to go to some comments here from Anonymous. Just on the one word, it's really appropriate to bring in here. This person says, the one word on the European way is people-focused. Explanation, it's different than the US, that's successful business focused, and China focused on the party success, and the EU's way forward should and will be people-focused. Equality, fairness, privacy are core values that will be upheld in the future. We heard that through the students. We've been hearing that here. Danny, there's a lot of interest here in the chat around the Chinese way. I started off asking Marietje and Prabhat about what the challenge was. Prabhat did excellent ninja move and said, I want to talk about the challenges. So you get to talk about the challenges as well as the opportunities in regulation.
Well, so I work on the political consequences of digital technology, so especially social media and the challenge that they may bring by catalyzing and contributing to disinformation, fake news, all the political instability we've been observing also in Europe, but also in China. And it seems to me that in Europe, the biggest challenge right now is that the dominant approach towards dealing with these issues really focuses on what the companies originally came up with as an idea to deal with it, which is based on what's called content moderation, so trying to delete or block content. But to me, that really cures the symptoms, but not the causes. And in my work, I find a very strong relationship with the targeted advertising-based business model and these outcomes. So to me, the biggest challenge right now is to address the root causes of these issues, which are related to the business model.
So I want to go to our first polling question, and you're going to see it pop up on your screen. And the question is, how many years are we talking about until good governance catches up with tech? Now, let's think of governance, just to all of the panelists' point, beyond just regulation. This is a bigger bucket, right, of than just regulation. How long is that going to take? 20 years, 15 years, 5 years, 10 or 2. So I'll give you a minute to answer that. How long is this going to take? And then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to say how long they think it's going to take. So I don't want to influence their voting too much. See what they're going to say. Give you a minute. Thanks for the questions coming in. A lot of anonymous people coming in. We have, yep. I want to get to some developing countries questions that we have coming on. Things around India, and I know you're going to talk a little bit more about China. Okay, Sebastian, how are we doing on our polling? Is it coming through? 1 more minute, Sebastian says. So Marietje, I'm just gonna go to you while we're waiting for this 1 minute of voting. I know we talked about 3 different ways: the Chinese way, the European way, and the American way. You have a new piece out in the MIT Review about a global way. Can you just give us a little preview about what that global looks like and where you see the EU fitting into that?
Yeah, so in the article, I make the case that essentially, even though this 3-way division is often cited, I mostly still see 2-way. One, in the democratic world, where I think thus far companies have had too much space to govern. And the second model in the sort of authoritarian space, top-down, state-driven, control-oriented governance model. And my plea is more for a cross-border democratic governance model for technology, which should also address the question from the audience about including the global south. I think for a long time, the EU or European countries and the US have been leading in developing a rules-based international order and building the institutions that went along with it. And somehow, we can talk about it longer when we have time, they've kind of hit the pause button when it came to the digital world, presumably hoping that the technologies themselves would have liberating effects, would enhance freedoms, would empower people, would emancipate individuals. And we now have too many lessons learned to conclude that that has not materialized. The promise does not automatically lead to success. And so I think it is vital, especially as democracy is under enormous pressure, that there is deliberate rulemaking, deliberate principle protection, deliberate institution building to also govern with a democratic focus in the digital world. And so I'm hoping that the EU in this case can take the leadership when it comes to finding new allies, working together across the world. Surely the transatlantic relation is still important, even though we're going through difficult times. But for a democratic model to really take hold, it needs to be global.
Great. I want to go into that a little bit more, Marietje, particularly the question on institution building. What does that mean? Because that sounds interesting. So I want to give you the poll results. I'm going to ask you all what your thoughts are. So with the audience, the least was 2 years. And then there's a tie between 20 and 15 for the next lowest. then 10. But the winner, with an optimistic crowd here, was 5 years by quite a lot. So we're talking about good governance in the internet in 5 years. Danny, I'm going to ask you, what was your thought? What was your number about how long it was going to take to get this underhand in a better way with all the principles we've talked about?
I was with the 5 years.
Okay. And why? Why? That seems fast to me. Why? That seems like unbelievably fast. How can that happen?
Because I think currently the European Union is committed to making decisions, and corporations are going to respond very quickly.
Okay. There's commitment driven. We heard that from the executive vice president. Values, first principle based. Prabhat, how many years are you looking at until we have a good governance system?
It's a tough question because I think we're kind of simultaneously there already and we'll never be there. So it's something between now and infinity. I think just kind of what do we mean by good governance? I think that one of the things that maybe if we can have five elements that are really important to me personally. I think transparency of decision making, inclusiveness and balance of decision making, accountability of the decision making process. But at the same time, also kind of the rule of law element that Marietje mentioned right at the beginning, fundamental rights compliance, and also technological savviness. I mean, those 5 elements are, for me, right, the kind of the 5 elements of good governance in the space where we are regulating. And this is a kind of aspirational goal that you never quite reach perfectly because every part of this is kind of constantly shifting. What we mean by transparency changes all the time. Inclusiveness and balance, we understand how hard it is to kind of reach all sorts of stakeholders, how the stakeholder community shifted and skewed towards those who have more means to influence and to have their voice heard, and how hard it gets to kind of reach people who might be affected. And this links to the inequality point that one of the students made right at the beginning. Accountability is also an ever-evolving concept. We thought that transparency could substitute for accountability to transparency reports and more data, and now we understand that people are really kind of overloaded. What we're looking for is meaningful transparency. So I think it's an ever-evolving thing, and it's very difficult for me to put a time on it. But I think a more important conversation is that what do we mean exactly by good governance? And I just threw out some ideas there.
Thanks very much, Marietje. How about you? How long, with all of the caveats that's always changing, but when you ask a person in the know, there's good governance going on in technology relative today, how many years do you think?
I think the next 10 years will be really important, but I also recall when I just started as a freshly elected member of the European Parliament a little over 10 years ago, that the digital single market was the big new vision. And I couldn't wait to get it finished. I thought we had no time to lose. And I was talking to a colleague of mine who saw me getting all excited and, impatient and ready to roll. And I remember very well that he said, "Oh, relax, breathe in, breathe out. In 10 years, we will still be talking about a digital single market." And at the time, I thought that was the most cynical thing I heard in a long time. I thought, oh my goodness, this is why politics has to change. But lo and behold, it's actually true. We're still talking about the digital single market. We're also talking about a lot of other things, which I think is great. But these things take some time. So I would say 10 years is realistic, but I do believe that the next 10 years will be crucial for Europe in setting the tone, setting the parameters. And I can only hope that I'm wrong and that it will be done in 2 years.
Marietje, thanks for that. I've been asking this question all summer. I was with policymakers, both political appointees as well as staff, public service staff from around the world. And the 10 years was the number that most of them had. And one issue that Marietje and I have talked a lot about is this trade-off between inclusion and lawmaking and speed in lawmaking. And you can feel that tension. You heard Prabhat talking about multi-stakeholders. It takes time to hear and listen to people. So that's the difficult trade-off we have in good governance, speed versus time. I'm going to go to the audience for another poll question. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very certain, to 1 being very uncertain, do you think the European way will win out? Now, I know, Marietje, you put something on the table that it has to be global, but let's answer that question later. But the European way that Prabhat's laying out with these principles that you all have talked about. The poll should come up in a minute, and you're going to put 10 is very certain, is that we're gonna do this. Lots of optimism. You heard it from the students, all the way down to 1, and we'll talk about that in a minute. While people are voting, though, I'm gonna go to you, Danny, and where are you on that number? Try not to let this influence you in your number, but Danny, where are you on the European way? Very certain, not certain?
I am pretty optimistic, I have to say. I give it an 8.
An 8? Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty optimistic, mainly because I think Europe can play digital aikido, which means making a weakness into a strength. We don't have a very strong European digital sector, which has allowed us to enforce GDPR. And I think we can also be bold in terms of some of the regulations. But I also have, I know it's very challenging. So, and we also have threat from authoritarian elements within Europe. So I'm giving it an 8.
An 8. Prabhat, how about you?
I'm also optimistic. I think 8 sounds right. Because there's a little 2 points for modesty at the end there. But just I want to repeat the point I just made in response to the previous poll. Let's not fool ourselves that there's an end point here. There's a kind of clear point when we can say we've done it and it's over and it's finished. This is an ongoing process. There's a transformation going on. It's really a kind of deep revolution. It'd be a bit, I think, wrong and maybe even misleading to think that there's a kind of a moment when it's done and we're ready and we move on to something else. I think that here in the digital transformation that the executive vice president spoke about, it's also about, the goal is also the path in some ways. So I think that I would give it an 8, but with this important caveat.
The goal is the path. I really liked when the executive vice president was sort of being pushed on things being hard. She's like, it should be hard. This is hard work. It should be hard. We should like hard. It's like we all should take an oath to being stoic. Marietje, I know your path in politics was not easy and you've embraced hard. What is your number with the caveats of it's a long, long road?
Well, I would actually say that Europe has to be very careful not to lose the advantage it has when it comes to regulating. And this is not my wish, but this is my assessment of what I think is happening. In the United States, I see rapid catching up, not on the same principles as in Europe, but on the basis of invoking national security or, antitrust rules that are being developed or focusing on threats to democracy in different ways. So I do believe that it has taken the United States a long time to catch up with the awareness of all the harms that come with basically out of balance power for big tech companies. But at the same time, I think when the US acts, it acts fast. And this could actually have implications for Europe's ambitions, which has very much been at the forefront of regulating. Similarly, China is actually catching up in a completely different way, but should also not be underestimated. And the last thing I'd say is that for Europeans to actually succeed in setting standards, the standards also have to be percolating through successful business endeavors. So it cannot just be set by regulating, but there should also be growth, there should be innovation, there should be European successes built on top of these principles that we all hold so dearly. So I think the best thing Europeans can do is not to be complacent and to keep being very, very driven, but not to only celebrate the notion of being a super regulator without adding growth.
Thanks, Marietje. Maxwell, I hope you're still listening. I think Marietje is picking up on some of your needing jobs, needing access to capital, sort of growth, how to use technology to build the economy that we want with this great talent that is here in Europe. I'm speaking at an entrepreneur conference tomorrow, and someone's making an argument that Europeans have the best entrepreneurs in the world, and what will happen in a governed world where that can really work. So let's hear what the audience says. So most people said 7. And then as these things go, there's a lot in the middle, but then there's a lot of 3s on the results. So optimism followed by some important skeptics. I want to go to some very specific questions for each of you, and then we're going to answer some of the questions in the chat. So if you can keep your responses quite short. We can't talk about a launch of a center, Danny, and not hear a little bit more about what the center will be doing and what your vision is for this and this big question of digitization of Europe, but also digital governance. So Danny, can you tell us what to expect from this new center?
Sure. So So we have discovered that most people, when they imagine the future, they're pretty fearful of digital technology. And I think at the center, we want to contribute to a positive vision of digital governance, of how we can promote public well-being. And we do that by conducting research, teaching, and also outreach activities. And I would say that probably what really makes the Center for Digital Governance special is that we, as a faculty, it brings together a group of people, Joanna Bryson, Gerhard Hammerschmidt, Turit Husted, Luciana Cingolani, Keegan McBride, who earlier also posed a question to the Vice President, who are really committed to not only be stuck in the ivory tower, but reach out and inform policymakers about what we can learn about the consequences or the empirical evidence that informs decision making.
Super. Marietje, I'm going to go over to you. You have a new academic home in Stanford, so you've been spending a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and there's been some questions here in the chat around what we can learn to do or not do from the American way. And you started talking about that a little bit, but maybe a few things that aren't so obvious as we move forward in figuring out the European way from the Americans, my people.
Yeah, well, it's nice to see the crossovers going in all directions, you know, Americans in Europe, Europeans in America. And I think we need the same kind of crossovers between the worlds of governance and the worlds of technology. And that's what I set out to do at Stanford after serving in the European Parliament. So I'm really happy and wanted to congratulate the Hertie School for this new initiative. And I look forward to fruitful cooperations. But what do I see in the United States? Well, I think one big clear experience after the COVID pandemic is how thin the buffer is for a lot of people. So how the so-called gig economy or so-called platform economy has really meant for people to live as day wagers, not even paycheck by paycheck, because these people do not have paychecks. And when there's a little bit of a crisis, and in this case, a major crisis, it means that a lot of people cannot get by. And I think we have our own problems in Europe, but this is not one of them. We do take better care of people. And I think that the investments in education, in healthcare, in social benefits for those who need it is something unique for Europe. And it may not have been so clear, and there may have been a sort of dreamy ideal of what the major successes of entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley look like. But now that we can see the flip side, the shadow side very clearly, I'm curious to see whether this, for example, could lead to more appreciation for the need to tax tech companies, for example. You know, there's so much revenue and profit being made without taxation. And the question is, if the profits are only going to go to the private sector, but the costs are going to lean on the public, then the imbalance is going to continue. And I personally don't think it's sustainable, but at the end of the day, this is a political question.
Big political questions. It'll be so fascinating to see how this unfolds. I know that there's some research going on at the Hertie School coming up on platform economies and governance. So we'll be hearing more about that. Prabhat, you're at the Commission doing the heavy work with all this optimism, with this stoic belief of the long road ahead. What can the Hertie Center do? What can civil society do to support that work and the vision?
Well, I think a key point is to do what we're doing today, is to engage in debate and to kind of discuss the issues and their complexity and their richness and diversity across the continent. I think it's not a top-down initiative in the sense that the Commission makes a proposal, but then there are debates at national level with the Council and the European Parliament, and really these projects are so important and they touch so many different aspects of our lives that the most important part is to research the issues and to debate them, because I think this is the kind of democratic underpinning of our legitimacy to act in the first place. So we can only welcome more debate and more discussions around, like the ones that we're having today. And even without the Commission, because there's no way we'll be able to be everywhere. But the issues that we're talking about today are really at the heart of what the what the vision is of the executive vice president and the leadership of the European Commission at the moment for the next digital decade. And it's really important that this is based on a comprehensive societal debate of how we see the way forward.
Thanks for that. I'm thinking a lot about this call for debate and the European Commission holding the heart of democracy to really do that. And we here in Europe are very happy to be living in this democracy, wanting to protect it, while worldwide people's satisfaction with democracy is going down. And anyone who's watching the US election knows that technology companies and the platform are really impacting democracy. So it seems to me that it is urgent that some of these issues get figured out, or else we won't have as vibrant of democracy. So now I want to go to a speed round. By the way, Danny, I see your colleague Joanna Bryson, who we saw in the video. She's on here on the chat. I'm going to go to a speed round, so I'm going to try to direct these to each of you. If you could just answer as quick off the top, and then we're going to have one last poll, and it's already an hour. How did that happen? So this is going to go to you, Marice. Nuria says, why is it that big tech companies are still paying such low taxes? If this is a problem, we know it. Why is it still happening?
There's no political appetite in the United States to get this done either domestically or internationally at the OECD, which is basically the platform where this is the most advanced discussion. And there's just some news out today that it looks like the perspectives, the horizons are postponed again. And I think that it may actually lead to countries, there's been speak of this by France and other countries, to basically act regardless of a global agreement. And I think that that would be a missed opportunity. But at the same time, the legitimacy for not doing anything is eroding very quickly. So the pressure on governments to act is big. Let's see whether the US election will change anything. I'm not too hopeful, but it could change the view to alliances and the appreciation for, again, balancing private and corporate profits with societal needs, especially now.
Thanks, Marice. I'm going to ask another political question. It was the last one to come in via anonymous. And Danny or Prabhat, you tell me which one of you wants to answer this. If this is all and ultimately a political question, how far can we go if we don't address our fractured political landscape, sort of polarization, which may be a topic that you're going to be studying at the Hertie School? So maybe Danny, I'll throw it to you. Like, shouldn't we be studying that in the role of the internet? Don't we have to tackle that in order to get to good governance?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question because social media are nowadays blamed for everything, including polarization and so forth. But if you really look into the causes of polarization, you find that a lot of the causes, at least in the US, are related to migration, people moving to areas where you have Whole Foods, you have yoga centers for the Democrats, and then certain kinds of churches for the Republicans. But I do strongly believe that social media act as a catalyzer. So of course, we also have to tackle these issues through other means, but we can also deal with them to a certain extent when we deal with digital technology.
Super. So thanks, Prabhat. This one's going to be for you. Will be our last question, and then while he's answering it, if my friend, the tech guy, Sebastian, there's real people behind making this happen. So big gratitude to all the people who are doing that. Mackenzie Nelson of Algorithm Watch asks, how is the Commission thinking about meaningful transparency? You talked about the value of transparency. Are you auditing frameworks for algorithmic systems on the table? So how are you doing transparency? And while you're answering, a poll's going to come up basically asking you, leaving this conversation, this exciting launch. I feel like we need champagne or Prosecco. Yeah, there's both European popping. Really dear congratulations to you and all of your colleagues. It's really extraordinary. We need you. We need this momentum. You're going to have a chance to vote. Are you feeling more optimistic about a European way and our ability to do this long road in a time frame, less or the same? So, Sebastian, if you could put that poll up. But on this meaningful transparency, Prabhat, could you explain what you're thinking about the Commission very shortly?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we want to be clear about is that transparency for whom and about what. So transparency for users is not the same as transparency for regulators and transparency for people who exercise oversight, or transparency towards researchers who might be scrutinizing what's going on the platform. So that's one way of breaking it down. And when we speak about meaningful transparency on an algorithmic system, there's a question that really can only be answered about experts. Are they really discriminatory, or are they kind of amplifying hateful content? This is something that an ordinary citizen cannot really be asked to check. And so the transparency towards users needs to be somewhat different. It needs to aim at empowering users that they have choices, meaningful alternatives in the way that content is kind of presented to them. So these are the kind of avenues by which we kind of break down the question of transparency, by being clearer about what kind of transparency, for which purpose, and towards whom.
Thanks so much. Joanna Bryson says, just on this question of urgency, if we don't get this resolved in 5 years, then we won't be able to address the climate crisis. So we better do it in 5 years. What we're doing now is very urgent, and it matters. And I know you're going to take that at the Hertie Center very strongly. I'm going to read out in just a minute the final results. But I just quickly, Danny, could you say 30 seconds on what we're seeing in the Global South? We've been talking a lot about Europe and China, or provide anyone who wants to answer this. Any insights about how digital governance is being addressed, handled, made inclusive in this global approach?
Yeah, so I can't talk about the whole Global South because I've been working on China for 20 years, but China is very actively exporting the Chinese model. It has held a world conference on internet issues annually since 2014, and many of the representatives that are coming to these events are from Russia, Pakistan, Iran, Central Asia. So I think the Chinese model is going to catch up, but of course not everywhere in the Global South.
We just heard from Gayatri Doctors. It would be great to connect with the Center for Digital Governance from India, enjoying this session. So here we go, lots of partnership. So we have left a bunch of us more optimistic, most of us the same. And I think that's just the complexity of the issue. And I want to give the last word to each of your speakers. One last word, Danny, on what the center will be doing, just in a word.
Oh, in a word, we're going to promote good models for digital governance.
There you go. A sentence is good. Prabat, a word to leave us optimistic, or a sentence?
Opportunity. I think this is let's look ahead, hopeful towards a brighter future. I think it can be done.
Yeah, we definitely, Ray Bradbury said that humans start off with a romance before it comes reality. And I think we need to be living in a romance of a digital world that works for all of us. Mariche, what is your romance or a word you want to leave us with?
Cooperation. I hope there will be a lot of fruitful cooperations coming to and from the center, and that between the worlds of good governance, governance in general, and technology, there will be mutual learning. There's often a trend to say, oh, policymakers and lawmakers don't know anything about technology, and then often people laugh. But clearly there's a lot of learning to go around when it comes to engineers that could use some learning about democracy and the rule of law. So I hope there will be cooperation and mutual exchange of knowledge.
We've had two great politicians, the Executive Vice President and Mariche here as examples of people who are in politics and really care. And my last word is really grateful. Grateful for all of you that have tuned in. Grateful for the Hertie School, the European Commission. We all could be doing lots of things with our time. That we choose to do this really matters. Joanna Bryson said we have 5 years. We have elections coming up. This is the heart of democracy and the heart of human existence. I'm not overplaying it. This is really fundamental stuff. So everyone keep collaborating, keep optimistic, and know that it's hard, but hard is good. So thanks everyone for joining. Congratulations to the Hertie Center. Thanks, Mariche. Thanks, Prabat.
Thanks, bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Danny. Thanks to all the team who put it together.
Thank you.